And hello, everybody. I don't know if the stream is picked up yet. I think it has. And there we are. Say, something went right. Can you believe that? I actually did something right today. Um, hello, everybody. Making a little joke because today we're going to talk about what to do when everything goes wrong. Now, um, we had an event yesterday, and I'm not going to talk about it right now. I'm just going to say that I don't think it went as bad as some people feel, but it didn't go great. It could have been better. And this is both for the players and the umpires. So, what I want to talk about today is as a player, what do you do when your plan goes wrong? When you're running or when you're participating in a Kriegsspiel and you're doing something, now I can see. Um, and things start to go wrong for you, what should you do? Because we had players display a number of different reactions to what was going wrong. We put people into a Kobayashi Maru scenario, which is basically a no-win situation. What do you do when it goes wrong? Also, as an umpire, what do you do when things go wrong? So you're running a game, you've planned out this game, you're running it, and it just starts to go sideways. Maybe you're making mistakes, maybe you're forgetting things, maybe the players have broke your scenario, they're doing something completely off script that you didn't expect. What do you do? So I'm going to draw off my experience, much of it hard won and hard gained, to share with you some of my tips for what you can do when it all goes wrong. In addition, Achilles is here, and Achilles is also going to give us some tips and advice just based on his life experience of what you do when it all goes wrong. So, Achilles, hello, welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, and Eli is here, so Eli wants to pop up. There goes the neighborhood, everybody. Eli is going to talk, so.
Oh man. Go ahead, Achilles. You're good, dude.
You know, Eli, I told you this was an hour from now, and here you are early and, well, actually on time. That's disappointing to me. But anyway, I'll try to conceal it. What to do when Eli shows up and it all goes wrong? What do you do? All right.
Technical difficulties. Technical
Yep.
difficulties.
Yep. Oh, I don't think my mic's working anymore, guys. But anyway. All right, all right. So, yeah, we make a lot of jokes at my expense, which is fine because the humor is everything I do is wrong. Achilles has pointed this out many times that he's done this to me in games. He's like, "What's your read on the situation, and what's your plan?" And I'll give my honest assessment, and then of course I'm completely wrong. So we've made this joke that because I'm wrong 60% of the time, what I do is I answer whatever the questions are, and then I just do the opposite. And now I've gone from being wrong 60% of the time to being correct 60% of the time. Works wonderfully. So there you have it. Robert on the live stream is saying a broken clock is right twice a day. Or as I like to say, the sun shines on a dog's rear every now and then. So there you have it. All right. Let's talk about it. Okay. Eli and Achilles both helped me host the scenario yesterday, and I do not want to talk about the scenario. It was, like I said, it was a disaster. And I could have benefited from the advice I'm probably about to give. The problem is, as it was unfolding, I didn't realize it was such a disaster. And that's because of a variety of personal failings. So rather than detail my moral deficiencies, I think we'll just get into the meat and potatoes here. We had a scenario yesterday where, and I said I'm not talking about the scenario, and I'm not. I'm talking about a situation. We had a situation where we had three columns of three brigades. Let me make this a little larger here so people can actually see if that works. That didn't work. Probably because I was hitting the wrong button. Very typical Marshall. There we are. Okay, so we had, three units here. We had a column here, we had a column here, and we had a column here. And we actually had additional columns going back to the rear. We had like 7 or 8 brigades. And we had a situation where the Op 4, and I'll make them green. Usually Op 4 is red, but in this case, I've used red already. Another mistake. Where these units were ambushed, and what these commanders at the front did was they tried to react. They tried to defend against the oncoming attack that was coming this way and this way. They got ambushed. This commander, I think, tried to react as well, but this commander did something completely unexpected. He ran away. He essentially told the troops, hey, just flee for this town. Now, one of the things that I would never do unless like it is a complete, absolute, full-blown existential, we have no chance of winning, it is just we've got to survive, like a nuclear attack has just taken place or something and we just can't resist, or we're fighting the aliens, I don't know. I would never tell my men to just flee because I'm afraid they would drop their rifles or muskets or whatever and run away, and I would never regain control. And that might not have been what the officer intended, and that is not what we imposed on the officer who gave the order. But I want to ask the experts here assembled, because they actually have military experience, whereas my military experience is limited to the Cupcake Wars. I want to ask them, is there ever a situation where things go so badly you would tell the men, just run for your lives? Achilles, would that ever happen?
You know, when you said that, the first thing that crossed my mind was when the captain of a sinking ship tells his crew to abandon ship.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know, that's at that moment you've given up all hope on the ship. So now it's every man for himself. Let's get the hell off of this thing before it sinks, right?
Right.
Yeah, I can imagine there might be a situation where you would tell your guys, look, you know, we have no way of getting out of here other than, you know, breaking up into small groups and trying to get out. You know, it's it's like at that point you're no longer an effective fighting unit. You're no longer under any control. It's everybody try to save as many as you can. But I would think that that's a pretty rare event. You know, generally speaking, yeah, you don't want to give up whatever cohesion you have. You try to maintain yourself as a group because you have a better chance of survival under those conditions. I mean, think about it. If an infantry unit breaks and starts to run and it's facing cavalry or cavalry's nearby, that's in every battle in history, most of the casualties occur when one side starts to run.
Right.
And it's at that point when they're easy meat, and that's when most of them get cut down. So trying to maintain cohesion in some form or another is optimal. So I would think it'd be a pretty rare event.
Yeah. Eli, same question to you. Is there ever a circumstance where you would just be like, every man for himself, abandon ship, get the heck out of here?
I can't think of one.
Okay.
The reason why I say that is because it's like, oh God, what have you done? Because
well, sometimes the situation is imposed upon you. You know, the ship has hit an iceberg, and you weren't on the bridge. You were asleep in your quarters or something, and the ship has hit an iceberg. Now, we're talking about a naval situation, but I'm sure that there is an equivalent on land where a unit, maybe you're a forward observation post or something, and the enemy is just attacking with overwhelming force, and it's either surrender, fight to the death, or run for your lives. You know, would you run for your life in that case? You know,
on that small scale. I'm sorry, like I was just gonna say on that kind of scale, you're talking about an LPOP or something like that. Yeah, they're going to run. I mean, on a small scale, they're going to run. They don't need orders. And usually you wouldn't have to tell your troops if the situation's hopeless. You wouldn't have to tell them to run. They're going to run without you.
Yeah. What about in this case, in the scenario? So I'm sharing my screen so you guys can see what I've drawn on the map. You can also join the map, by the way, in tabletop. same as yesterday. But what about in this case? Did this officer screw up? Was this a logical reaction to something going wrong?
No,
Yeah,
no, I don't think
why not?
because it kind of tags on to what Achilles is saying. You lose all your cohesion, and I mean, why bother reforming? Because now, granted, it's Kriegsspiel. It's a little bit different because, I mean, obviously he was able to reform, but at the same time, it's dang, what a morale shock! Everybody run. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think, and we did this to the player deliberately. We really did. We did give the player the opportunity to stand, fight, and face the enemy. I don't think we would have broke the enemy on the first, or broke them on the first turn. We didn't do that even here when they were ambushed on two sides. Those commanders who gave orders that kept their men under command and control, we honored those orders. Now, they still end up retreating, of course, because that's the scenario we're putting them in. But their units were not like completely routed. They had a couple turns where they were still able to give commands and the units obeyed. Where in this case, the flight instinct rather than the fight instinct took over. I have a hard time faulting the commander, but we do need to get away from the specifics here because I don't want this person to feel picked on. Because
yeah, and I don't want to.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, as a player, and here's the $10,000 question. As a player, what do you do when you're toast? When you're getting hit on 2 or 3 different sides and it's fallen apart. Now, mind you, this is a game. And so as a game, you might say, well, we're going to stand and fight to the death. But we encourage people to think and play realistically. So what do you do in that situation? And I'll pitch this one to Achilles first. I'm sad you're not on the table, but I can draw for you. Because I think we did have a situation where a commander made the opposite decision. But I'll let Achilles answer that however he chooses. Go ahead, Achilles.
You mean making the opposite decision, as in trying to make a stand?
What do you do? I mean, there's a range of options, right? Here you are. The tsunami of enemy is coming. It's about to wash over you. You can surrender, you can fight to the death, or you can run for your lives. What do you do? Well, and there's calculus involved, right? Like there is a situation where you might surrender. Let's say you're completely out of ammo.
Absolutely.
And at least if you become a prisoner of war, because you know the enemy's just going to take you prisoner, because the enemy is at least civilized in their behavior towards prisoners. And in that case, you might become a prisoner of war because that imposes a burden on the enemy. And they have to divert resources to guarding you, feeding you, supporting you, keeping you alive throughout the duration. Now, that's better than perhaps standing there and being shot to death, right? But perhaps now you have your ammunition, you have the means to resist, so you continue to resist, at least until you're out of ammunition, right? Or, you could flee and run away, but it depends. I think it's situational, right?
It is, yeah.
So go ahead.
There's a mantra that we use, which is, my mission, my men, myself. Right? That's and it's in that order. And if you're in a situation like you were describing, where it's you can forget about the mission. You're not going to accomplish the mission more than likely. Whatever the mission was. Now the second part of that takes over. You have to take care of your men, preserve as many of them as you can, unless the first part again is the priority. In this case. The longer we resist, we're saving the rest of the army, or something like that. So it's very situational in that regard. So you might resist as long as you can, and then now it's no longer worth the candle. Now I'm losing men for no purpose. People are my men are dying without value, without purpose. And at that point, surrender becomes an honorable option. It's like, we're either all gonna get killed without any value, or we become POWs.
Right.
In which case, then that's what you do. You have to balance the priorities in that sense. And also you have to take into effect what can you actually do. Okay, how much control do you still have over the situation? I mean, your men may be surrendering on their own in smaller groups, or and usually it's safer to surrender in a large group than it is to surrender in small packets, because in a real thing, one guy surrendering is just as likely to just get shot down, because they don't want to deal with him.
Right.
And it's just easier for them to do that. But a large group surrendering, that's the goal. They're the enemy for the opposition. They're taking out that force from the equation, and they're not going to just shoot down an entire battalion right there, or something like that. So it does become very situational. I mean, you exhaust all of your options, and then if you have no other choice, then that's what you do.
Eli, do you want to speak to that at all?
When it comes to an ambush or something like that, you really only have two options. You either can defeat the ambush, or you fight to get out of the ambush.
Mm-hmm.
So those are your only two options. But in terms of, and this is what I actually think the player was trying to do. I'm not trying to segue it around back to him, but I just want to mention.
Well, we do have to apply this to Kriegsspiel games.
Yeah.
But again, Kriegsspiel modeling real life, and we want people to play real life, so the real life calculus has a bearing. So, but go ahead. You're right.
Me personally, I would, and this is what I think the player was trying to do. I think he was just trying to break contact. I don't think he intended to just entirely rout. That's what I think his actual intention was, and if that's the case, I can't say I blame him, because there are times where you just gotta kind of look at it and go, "Yeah, I'm not going to win that one."
Yeah.
That's really all there is to it. You just look at it and you go, "Yeah, I'm not winning that."
And I'm getting out. So, yeah, like I said, this is an understandable decision, in particular in a game. In real life, we could critique it a little harder or analyze it harder. I think from a gameplay perspective, the player doesn't want to be put out of the game, so the player withdraws. And again, the logic that the player expressed was sound, in my opinion. I still think it was an error, but that's my opinion. And I also had omniscience. I knew that there was enemy here, and so on. The player was punished in game. They lost a half battalion block, but then they were able to reform and move off. So while they were punished, we also showed them some grace, and it is what it is. Now, we had another situation over here on the right. We had a situation, or what I call Situation B, where a unit was surrounded, and he actually was kind of baited into it. I think he realized, perhaps 15 minutes too late, that he was a little overextended. Actually, I don't think it's necessarily his fault, though, because he had support when he advanced to... first he advanced to try to defeat the ambush. Let's be clear here. He tried to defeat the ambush, which is, you guys said in the debrief after the game that's a valid choice. In fact, it's a great choice. He did have some effect on the enemy. He actually destroyed an enemy battalion doing that. But then his support to the south melted away, and the enemy was able to come in and surround him, and he had a choice. And his choice was run away or stand and die. And he chose to stand and fight and die. Was that the right choice? Eli, what do you think? Was that the right choice? Even though you weren't umpiring that, do you think that's the right choice? Maybe?
Well, me personally, that's the kind of guy I am. I mean, if you're going to take us out, just do it. But we're going to make you pay for every bit of it.
Sure.
But in the interest of preserving lives, because I do agree with Achilles there. I mean, you got to look at your guys. I don't know, surrender probably would have been the option.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because there's a part of me that's like, all right, sweet, we're fighting this out, let's go. But then you gotta think, but what about all my troops?
Yeah. All right.
Because my reaction is to fight it out. Let's go. If you're gonna take me out, let's rock.
Right. Right.
But no, surrender.
Yeah. Let's I got comments on the YouTube I'm going to go to momentarily. But first I'm going to ask Achilles, because Achilles is well acquainted with what happened here in the calculus. Go ahead, Achilles. What's your opinion on this?
And actually you kind of mischaracterized what occurred here.
Okay. Fine.
He went forward and attacked the ambush, which was
right.
the correct thing to do, because he was still an unengaged unit, while the rest of those that were engaged were doing whatever it was they were doing to get out of the kill zone. He attacked the ambush, which was the correct move. He didn't get abandoned until after he pulled back, so he was actually down by that creek down there where that forest is.
Oh, that's right. He was further back. Yeah.
So he was doing a fighting withdrawal, and he got to that area and then actually got across that little forest, because there was a unit there at the edge of that forest that had already formed a line. He held off for a while, and then he filtered through them and formed a second line so that they could get out. So he was doing everything right at that all the way through there. And then that unit filtered through him and continued on way back to this town. His problem was that he was now in contact with the enemy. He had formed that line. There was another line of troops to his south, but that line of troops to his south got obliterated. And when they did, there was nothing behind them, because the commander of that force thought that there was going to be a second line behind him, but the force that he thought was going to do that didn't. Instead, they kept going on to the town. And so when that occurred, he ended up completely surrounded in that forest. And I actually didn't give him the option. I just told him he was Custer. He was dead. I didn't give him the option to surrender. I just said they killed them all. But essentially, it was the same. He could have, at that moment, had I given him the choice, he could have surrendered or not surrendered. But up to that point, he had done everything right, and yet his command got wiped out, which was, it indicates that, yes, that old saying about sometimes you can do everything right and still lose. It was just one of those moments, and there was no way out of there. So yeah, he went down fighting gloriously, died with his boots on, but he could have surrendered. Either way, it didn't matter. His force was eliminated from the equation. And for situation A, I do want to say the commander in that case, by the way, is an excellent commander. He's somebody who's served as a corps commander for me in 2 big games, and he is really good. His decision was made on whatever information he had at that moment, and this is going to be a common problem. You're operating on limited intelligence, limited information, and you make a choice, you make an action, and sometimes it just doesn't work. I mean, let's face it, that's a Kriegsspiel problem. That's a reality that you have to deal with in every game.
And one thing I'll add to the player's credit, in his defense, is we were giving them limited time to respond, and I think you were you have 3 seconds, and you were actually giving them 30, which I thought was incredibly generous of you. But you were telling them you have 3 seconds, and you could hear the mental paralysis just seize them, and they're like, "Oh my God, is this really happening? What do I do?" And then, of course, they spit out a decision or stammer something, or they ask you a question to get more information because they're just trying to pull the right lever. And then, boom, they have to live with their choice that they made under pretty intense pressure. So to bring this back to the game realm, what do you do? And what I'm going to tell you is, based on what has been discussed here, there is calculus that you have to perform very quickly. And in fact, it would probably benefit you as a player to use the downtime between your turns to run the calculus. You should always be running this calculus. When you learn how to fly an airplane, and I'm really into aviation and flying and all that, but when you learn how to fly an airplane, one of the things that you're taught is no matter how wonderful and beautiful everything is from 18,000 or 7,000 feet or whatever altitude you're at, you should always be looking for a place to land, because an emergency can happen at any moment. That's why it's an emergency. That's what makes it an emergency. You weren't expecting, boom, you strike a bird, boom, the engine cuts out. You don't know why, but the engine's gone. You can't restart. You do the procedures, nothing. You're going to have to land. Where do you land? And if you don't know where you can land, well, you're going to land wherever the laws of physics say you're going to land, and that might not be a very nice place to land. So, likewise in a game, even if you're marching along and you're playing what you think is called marching simulator, and we unfortunately had a lot of players doing marching simulator because the scenario was, well, it involved that. But we had players who spent most of the game just going from there to there. But even if you're playing marching simulator, because these guys also were just going from here to here, marching, and all of a sudden now they're ambushed. So you always have to keep in mind that the umpires or the other opponents could spring something on you, and they might only give you 3 seconds to answer, which is something we've literally done with literally 3 seconds to players before. I filmed Achilles doing it. And what do you do? So the thing is, the solution to that problem is to perform the calculus as you go. Do my men have the means to resist? Do they have ammunition? Do I have an effective and powerful fighting force? Do I have support? If we have to retreat, where are we going to retreat to? What direction are we going to go at least? How far might we have to go? If I surrender or I make a last stand, how does that impact the game? How does that impact, like Achilles said, my mission? What was that, Achilles? My mission, my men.
My mission, my men, and myself.
And myself. All right. So
in that order.
Yeah, and so you think through that calculus every single turn, and I think that will help you to make better decisions and decide whether, hey, do we do A or do we do B? Both are defendable, both are understandable, but one of those decisions is probably more optimum than the other. Remember, over here we had 2 brigade commanders who did B and 1 who did A, and although the end result was largely the same for all 3, the players who did B got a point in the game. We gave them credit for at least doing what they did, rather than the player who did option A. Now, again, compliments to player A. I don't want them to feel picked on, but hey, it all happens to the best of us. All right, let's take a look at the comments in the YouTube, and then we're going to talk about from an umpire perspective. What do you do when it all goes
While you're
wrong?
looking at that, let me add one other thing.
Go ahead.
Just because it fits with what you were just talking about. One of the things that you're doing when you're leading troops, like, for example, on a patrol or on a march or to contact or whatever, you are continuously designating a rally point. Okay, that's one of those, in case of emergency. Okay, as we're moving from point A to point B, you're finding locations where you could rally your troops and they would have a defensible position, and so you will point to a spot and say, this is the rally point. Okay, so if we get into trouble down the road, and we have to run, this is where we come together again and reform. That's an example, a real life example of just what you're talking about. Always be thinking about, okay, what's the worst that can happen? What do I do if everything falls apart in the next 5 minutes? What am I going to do? So you're always looking at, okay, what happens if they come over from over there? What happens if they come up from over there? That's part of your job, is to try to anticipate those kinds of situations so that you can react with speed, because you don't want to be thinking about it when it happens.
Right,
You
you're
want
not
to have
gonna
thought about it
have time to
beforehand.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
Anyway, I'm
that's
sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Eli.
That's a really good point. And to kind of tag on to Marshall was saying about your calculus, you're doing that before you get in there.
Mm-hmm.
All of those, like a lot of that calculus, you look at the ground, and based on the information you have, you've already made all the decisions you need to make before you go into that fight.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to say,
on the fly, not even a little bit on the fly.
yeah. I also want to say, and here's just a little pro tip that I'm also extracting from this. This works in reverse. If you are, in particular, if you're a commander and you're planning to ambush the enemy or attack the enemy, you want to get in the enemy's head and think that, well, he's going to be moving along here, and at some point we're going to ambush him, and one of these guys or all of them are going to say, you know what, retreat to cover, which is here. So let's make sure that cover is infested with our men, so when they retreat that way, this becomes a kill zone. So just another little pro tip, both I guess in real life and as a player, I think that's also an excellent strategy for the Op4. So let's take a look at the comments here. You guys have been patiently waiting here. Robert says, Achilles, the master of things going wrong. I don't think so at all. I have that title. I'll fight you for it, Achilles.
Robert would know. Robert would know about things going wrong for me.
Robert says this, and Robert was in the Navy, I believe, and it says it's not every man for himself. Abandoned ship is drilled into the crew. So there is a discipline that exists even when the order is given, abandoned ship. And I imagine that's quite true. Obviously, you would drill that in the Navy. You would actually drill that, I think. Sicko Borsma. I wonder who that is in the IKS. If you're not in the IKS, you need to join. But I'm going to say this. He says this. Yeah, abandoned ship is still a controlled process. I think they mean basically ordering a route, which feels like a contradiction in terms. All right. Mm-hmm. Robert says the proper answer to this situation is a fighting retreat. Okay, so I think Robert is looking at this situation here. And B, the first two brigades did order fighting retreats. We also had fighting retreats elsewhere, which was actually the point of the scenarios. We wanted these guys to order fighting retreats. And we wanted to see how they would do that. Would they support each other? Would they, form two lines? Or would they do the thing where they just spread everybody out? We were looking for that. Let's go back to it. It says the proper answer is a fighting retreat. Worst case scenario is to sacrifice a unit to stop the attacker while the rest fall back to town, which again is B over here. Let's see here. Robert also says close ambush with no line of retreat. The only option is to attack into the ambush. All right. Sicko says surrender is always an option too, of course, but I can imagine run like hell and gather at X and hope for the best. Which is what we talked about, and I think that's a spot-on comment. And finally, he says, good Lord, won't anyone consider surrender? And yeah, we do. We want players to think realistically at a certain point, maybe surrender is in fact an option. I have never seen a Kriegsspiel player order a surrender. I've never seen it. It has never happened. In my decade and a half or more of Kriegsspiel experience, I have never seen anyone say, you know what, let's surrender. No, they don't do it because they think they're playing a game. And they are playing a game, but this is a different kind of game where we want you to think like it's real and role play it even like it's real. Get to that next level. I hope my son's making me breakfast downstairs. Brendan, are you making me breakfast? Brendan. Oh, it's my wife. Okay, so the answer is no. I am not getting breakfast. Okay, I thought it was my son. My son will still make me breakfast, but talk about every man for himself, right? All right, let's continue. I'm joking. Let's talk about umpires now. All right, so when I ran my first Kriegsspiel, and this is something I wrote about in a magazine article that was published like 5, 6, 7 years ago. It was some French wargaming magazine. I think it was called Battles Magazine. I wrote about my very first Kriegsspiel experience, and I'll save you the pain of having to look it up and read it. If you want to read it, I think I've got it saved somewhere, but it doesn't matter. I talked about how the first time I ran a scenario, I didn't know how it was going to go. I was really like, oh man, what if I get in here and I start this and it's just a complete disaster and I'm absolutely humiliated? Just like something I've done quite recently, despite all my years of experience. What do you do? And the answer to that is I had sort of an ejection seat mechanism. I told the people at the start of the scenario that, there are storm clouds gathering. There's the possibility of thunderstorms and a downpour, in which case the scenario would come to a sudden end. Now, that had the effect of putting pressure on both sides because they didn't know how long they were going to get to play or what they had to do. I, as an umpire, knew that if I just completely failed hard, I could just call it. Now, I ended up not having to do that. What I did have to do was I had all these kind of rules dreamed up. I had to shed a lot of that because that was minutia, and I was learning. This was like my 4th or 5th Kriegsspiel experience ever, and I was running my first event with no assistance or anything or guidance or direction. I was just groping blind in the dark. The event was really, really successful. But yeah, you have that mechanism. And I think as an umpire, you have to understand that things are going to happen. As an umpire, you have what I call the movie in your head. And I actually use this with people all the time. There is a movie in your head of how things are supposed to go. Maybe you have a date planned. There's a movie in your head for how that date goes. Maybe you have a bunch of errands to run, things to do. There's a movie in your head how that goes. And when that goes off script, that's when things get dicey because you're likely to get upset and you're likely to respond in a less than gracious manner. It's going off script. And as an umpire, you're going to have a plan for a game, right? Yesterday's game, we gave them very little opportunity to go off script because the umpires were also the commanders. So there was really no chance for the players to go off script. They tried a little bit here and there, and when they did, we just steered them right back. So that's one of the tips that you can do. As an umpire, you can steer players back. We had players going this way. We had one player, I think, who said, I'm going to take just my skirmishers and go all the way around here. That was pretty off script. We let them do it, though, and guess what the punishment for that was? Okay, you only took a skirmish line, you're completely ineffective. So we punish that. That's one way to do it. Another way is, if they're marching this way and they say, well, let's go through the woods instead. Sorry, the woods are too thick. You can't get through. You're not making progress. You're going this far each turn. It's going to be a long, boring game. Maybe you should turn around. Something like that. But what do you do when your players go off script? I'll go first to Achilles, and then I'll see if Eli wants to weigh in. Eli doesn't have as much umpiring experience, but he does have practical experience, and I think he will have some good things to say here. So, Achilles, go ahead. What is your advice when a player in a game starts to go off script?
From the perspective of being his commander, I won't speak for the perspective of being an umpire. I've never run a game, so that I don't have any experience with. But as a commander, that happens every game. I mean, that's always going to be the case, and you have to be prepared for that. Somebody doesn't jump off when they're supposed to, or somebody goes to the wrong location, or any number of things. I mean, it's almost an infinite list of possibilities.
Someone goes full Marshall.
Yeah. or even full Sam. I mean,
Sam Miller. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of that one particular game against Jan, where Sam decided to take my cavalry and disappear.
Yeah.
and then tried to cross a creek he couldn't cross. And that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I lost my cavalry commander.
Yeah, Leroy Jenkins in the gaming nomenclature. Go ahead.
And and the fault for putting him in that position was mine. But you have to adapt. I mean, what's that saying? Adapt and overcome. You just have to
Improvise,
adapt to
adapt,
the situation.
overcome. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no other way to approach it. I mean, it's okay. This is I want to know what the situation of what is okay. This is what's happened. So you can't let yourself get bogged down in what should have happened. You have to immediately start thinking of how do I adjust to what is happening. And the best way as an overall commander, the best way to be able to impact that, I think, is by having some form of reserve.
Mm-hmm.
It's really the only way you can influence the battle anyway. And if you've got some kind of reserve, you've got something that you can use to adjust to the situation. That's I think is the preferred way, just off the top of my head. It's again, it's just a question of how do I best adapt to the current or new situation, and how does it change what I was doing overall, and how does it impact the plan overall. One of the ways that you minimize that is the simplicity of your plan in the first place. Mm-hmm. The fewer moving parts you have, the less things can go wrong, and the less impact those things going wrong has. If the plan is overall very simple, then yes, okay, you're essentially already pre-planning error. You know there's going to be mistakes and errors, but because of the simplicity of what you're trying to do, it won't have as big an impact on the overall planning. So what does go wrong? Okay, the wheels came off over there, but the first thing you look at is how does that impact what we're doing? Does it is it at a critical location? Is it going to impact what happens next or what we're doing? Mm-hmm. And then you have to adjust to that.
Yeah. Eli, I'll give you a chance to weigh in on the same question.
Well, I can't speak for umpires because I'm not an umpire. I've almost for my entire Kriegsspiel stint, I've almost always been a player. But you can tie in a little bit of it as so. Speaking from the perspective of adaptability, I'm gonna agree. It's basically just an agreement with Achilles here. It's you really kind of have to take it as it comes. Mm-hmm. So I've had plenty of situations in a Kriegsspiel game where something's happened, and I go, oh no, it's not what you expected it to be. And you just kind of look at it and go, okay, what do I do from here? So it's not really something that I sit there and go, oh my God, it went wrong. It went wrong. Mm-hmm. It went wrong. If you get into that loop, it's over. So you just kind of look at it and go, okay, what are my options? What do I have in front of me? So like think of any Kriegsspiel situation. I've got these troops available. This is happening over there. What I do with these troops that will offset that.
Yeah, have that reserve. Yeah, that's powerful. I do have a couple pro tips for umpires that I'm going to throw out here in a moment, but Wolfton asked to speak, so I want to I want to go to him and let him share what he would like to share. Go ahead, Wolfton. Are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Go ahead. What do you got?
Well, I think I can speak a bit from the umpire's perspective. I'm a bit of a rookie, but I've hosted a few games. And as an umpire, there's always that magical scenario that you want to have your players go through, and it's never going to work out that way. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think a good saying from actually Dungeons and Dragons, because if anyone's played that game, it never goes the way that the Dungeon Master thinks it's going to go, is that you just got to roll with it. And sometimes when you just roll with it, you actually have a better game than if everyone played how you were expecting them to play. So I think as an umpire, it's not about controlling what the players do. It's about making the scenario both realistic and fun for the players. And so if they do something you'd consider dumb, and all of a sudden, like for example, that skirmishing line. Imagine if the brigade or whoever was holding that town shifted to pay attention to that skirmishing line, which leads to the objective being wide open. It looks really dumb on paper, and if as the umpire, if you just say no, you can't do that, then you take away from that possibility.
So, in other words, what you're telling me, Wolfton, is sometimes you just have to let them do what they're going to do, which is what we did. But you're saying, yeah, sometimes just let it happen, right? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah. Well, it's usually they're in command of. They have an independent command, and so they need to be able to, I guess, lead an independent command.
Yeah, exactly. All right, no, and I think that's excellent and insightful advice. Thank you, Wolfton, for suggesting that. I'm going to throw out a couple of tidbits. These were technically offered, or at least one of these was technically offered in the post-game debrief. But you know what? Just thinking back, I think it's an outstanding pro tip, and it really does come down to planning. The more you rehearse, the more you train, the more you prepare, inevitably the better you're going to do. When I was learning management from the Scientologists, and that's a whole chapter of my life where I was learning how to manage people in business and stuff. And yeah, the Scientologists apparently are masters of this. So I was going to Clearwater, Florida, and taking these classes. It was great. It was actually a good time. But you know, they had this really cool saying that has always stuck with me, and I don't think it's just a saying that they have, but it goes like this: where you put your energy is where your success will be. And you think about that, right? You know, I am completely uncoordinated. I am horrible at a lot of things. I have a little bit of a natural tremor. I've had it since birth. So anything that involves dexterity or you know, my hands or whatever, not the best at it, right? You know, practical things like cooking. I literally almost burned down a house trying to make a pizza. So, yeah, don't put me in the kitchen. There's a reason I'm on the podcast and the rest of my family's in the kitchen right now. And I'm banned. But, you know, if I were to say I want to learn how to cook, and I really did put my energy into becoming a decent or respectable cook, at least in the home kitchen, I think I would be successful because I'm putting my energy into it. Now, let's get back to Kriegsspiel, right? Because this isn't about me. If you put your energy into planning and preparing your scenario, and I know Achilles and I did have a planning meeting that lasted about I don't think it lasted quite an hour. But if we had put an extra hour or two into planning the scenario, and it was that time was unavailable to me. This scenario was very much off the cuff, and I think the players sniffed that out and zeroed in on it correctly. And then we just got hammered in the debrief for it. But it makes sense, and I don't think that's necessarily unfair. We have to admit when we make errors because that's how we learn and grow. But at the end of the day, if you put time into planning a scenario, if you go full auto and you have or full blazer, who I think has the record, and you give the players 100-page briefing, that's going to lead to a much better experience for everybody. I remember when I planned Grand Gettysburg. Even though that was in the early days, that was even in the pre-IKS days, that was the Southern California Kriegsspiel Society days, it was our first major online game, I put a lot of energy into planning and executing that game, and it was a glorious success despite the fact that everything was clunky and awkward and difficult because we were doing a lot of things for the first time. It was still a success for the players because I put a lot of effort into planning it. So I think when you put energy into planning the game, you're going to have a much better outcome. You do not have to go full blazer and do a 100-page briefing or even full auto and have a 35-page briefing. You can do, when I say full auto, I'm talking about Ottovosky, one of our better umpires who's really good at planning. He's very much into that. I think you can give them a 1-page briefing. Off the cuff verbal briefing, probably fine for a very small personal game. But if the game is bigger than more than a few players, you probably do have to give the players something written and something that they have to keep in mind during the game. So I think planning is the first pro tip that I would give you. The second pro tip, and this is also a discussion that came up in the community last night actually, was how many blocks, how many units, how many elements do you give to a player? Yesterday I gave each player only 4 blocks. I could tell you as a player, I can have fun with 1 block. If it's like a cavalry block and I've got mobility, even 2 blocks, I can do some basic tactics like falling back. I have 1 unit move back. The other one holds the line to cover the retreat, whatever. I can do things. I can leapfrog. I can flank if you have 2 maneuver elements. I think 4 maneuver elements allows you to keep a reserve and do more stuff. 6 maneuver elements is even better. But then once you get above, I think 6 or once you get to like 8 maneuver elements or more, from an umpire perspective, the players get squirrely. They feel like they have extra units and they're like, well, I want to send one, out this way, or I want to send one this way. And that creates a lot of work and headache, and it slows the game down because now they're not trying to they're not concentrating on what's in front of them. They feel they have the resources to start doing things off to the right and off to the left and the rear and the front. And it gets messy. So for me, I found that the optimum for fast plays maybe about 4 units if you want a fast game, 6 if you want to give the players a little power and the ability to do a little bit more stuff and even take losses. But I think once you go above 6 maneuver elements, you're really inviting a lot of extra work. So with very little reward. So my advice in that case is, don't go above 4 or 6 units or maneuver elements for the players unless you really want them to have that additional power and flexibility, and you have the player to umpire ratio. If it's 1 umpire and 2 players, no problem. You can give them 12 units apiece, no problem. You can probably handle it. But if you have a poor, like a 1 to 6 umpire to player ratio, that's a disaster. 1 to 4 is pushing it. 1 to 6 player to umpire, and you're giving the players 6 blocks or more, that's going to be a disaster. So that's a very practical pro tip based on my long years of experience. If the number of blocks you give a player should correspond to the player to umpire ratio. And keep that in mind. If you do want to give them additional blocks, impose upon them a rule that the additional blocks can't go too far from each other. Otherwise, if you don't do that, they're going to start sending blocks way out here and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So that's my advice on that. I'm about ready to wrap up. We've gone for almost an hour, but before we do, I want to go through Achilles and Eli and see if they have anything that they want to throw out there. Perhaps we've missed something or they have a pro tip of their own. I'll start with Achilles. Go ahead.
I was just thinking on as you were talking about what you were just saying. Mm-hmm. In the military, and I think in any organization, large organizations, they go essentially by the 3 to 5 rule. You always have you don't have more than 5 people directly reporting to you, because that's your limit of control. Mm-hmm. And so an entire military organization, the structure is so that you don't have more than 5, and you can control large numbers that way, because if you just take like a squad, you have 2 fire teams, mm-hmm. and each one has a fire team leader, and so it's those 2 guys who are dealing with the squad leader, and then the squad leaders, you have 4 squads. So you have 4 squad leaders reporting to the platoon leader. And then you have 4 platoons, so you have 4 platoon leaders reporting to the company commander. And that way you're controlling 100+ guys from the perspective of the company commander, but he's really only talking to 4 guys, So he gives his order to 4, and so and I think that kind of tags on to what you were talking about, just the structure, not having more than 3, 4, 5 blocks. Because that's what you can effectively control. The more you start to add on to that, you start to lose control over it.
Yeah. And I'll also add to that, if you give players mixed unit types, in the K22 and K23 systems, I do not give players infantry, artillery, and cavalry because you end up neglecting one. I've seen a lot of players leave the supply wagons in the rear. I've seen them leave cavalry in the rear, or I've seen them send cavalry off on an adventure where it has to be botted by the umpire, creating more work for you. They're either a cavalry commander or an infantry commander. Don't let them command all three at that lower level. Now, obviously, if you are a corps or a commander or something, you're going to have a cavalry unit. But again, that commander, the guy commanding that unit, is only running cavalry and horse artillery. They're not running infantry as well, because once you start mixing those things, which have very different purposes on the battlefield, you end up getting players who are themselves overextended, and you as an umpire, that's just a recipe for further disaster. And believe you me, one thing I can cook is a disaster. All right. Eli, what do you have to share, man? Any final thoughts?
No, not really. I mean, nothing that can't wait for another time. I need something specific to really have any, like something, like a specific question or a specific topic to really offer anything.
All right. Totally cool. Totally fair. Wolfton, you're still up here. Is there anything you wanted to say? And by the way, I'll also invite anyone. I know we got Cookie, we got Peter, we got a couple names I don't quite recognize, but if any of you guys want to come up here and add something or ask a question, I've got time for you, so go ahead and just raise your hand in the audience there, and I'll call you up to speak. In fact, yep, here comes Cookie. Wolfton, though, go ahead. Anything you want to add?
Sure. I think I have a counterpoint for you saying walk far away from me and say,
hang on, Wolfton, your audio's poor. Wolfton, I can't understand you. I'm not hearing you clearly.
Hello?
Yep, go ahead. Try it now.
Sorry about that. My connection here is off. I think a big thing for player fans as well is organic limits. It's kind of been saying, you get a block there, you say, all right, if you want to move your block there, you're probably not going to be able to get chance to, or it may take an hour or two. And that players usually not do that though.
Yeah. That's good advice. Wolfton's audio is kind of breaking up, but if anybody missed that, what he's basically saying is impose limits on the commanders. This is how I understand what he said. He can correct me if I'm wrong. But, if a commander tries to send a block clear off to Timbuktu and he's in Gettysburg, Timbuktu, just so you know, is in Africa, which is a whole other continent. If you try to do that, then you're not going to be able to command that force, obviously. So you tell them, if you send that unit out, you're basically losing it for the entire game or for an extended period of time. And I have had players do that. Cavalry commanders are legendary for doing that. But I also understand when they're scouting, they want to, view a wide area. So I give cavalry commanders some latitude and I give them some grace. In other words, I rule in their favor more often than not, because that's what cavalry's supposed to do. And Achilles is like, ooh, because Achilles is a cav guy. I can just see it now. But when it's infantry commanders and your orders are, hey, march up this road and do this, you have a very clear task and purpose, and they want to send an extra unit. They think they have extra units. They want to send them off to do whatever else, go on an adventure. No, yeah, you really do. You want to impose that limit and say, no, that's probably not a good idea. Now, you might let them do it like we did here, but then there'll be a consequence for doing that. And it might make for a rich game experience. But you also might want to say as an umpire, no, you're not really able to do that. Or, you know what, well, you can have a lieutenant go do that, run that detachment. You really need to stay with your command. So that's another thing. All right, Cookie's here. Cookie, what do you have to contribute to our humble potluck of tips for umpires and players?
Basically, I wanted to just contribute a short story because I came in the Mo. Basically, I think 10 seconds before you said you've never seen anybody surrender in a Kriegsspiel game, and it was like, that happened to me once because I had to surrender in one of the battles of the American Civil War games that Carter is running, where essentially where I was standing in for another general, and then half of my force got essentially trapped at between the Confederate force and terrain at the end battle of Bull Run. I don't remember which one it was. And admittingly, the Empires were almost like fighting on really most likely is not going to work out, and it was like, okay, guess there's no real choice but to surrender at this point, because even fighting on is not going to inflict any more casualties and isn't really serving any purpose anymore.
That's really good to hear. Now, in my defense, I have not heard of anyone doing that. I think that's a smart decision. You've clearly did the calculus that we talked about earlier in the show to make that decision, and I think that's a great decision. I'm also going to add to anybody watching the podcast, especially in the future, Cookie, who you just heard from, is, in my opinion, the winner of Grand Waterloo, which was a battle we fought last week, because he's the individual player winner because of the excellence that he demonstrated during that event. He took a very bad lemon situation and he made lemonade out of it. So he is literally the poster child of making lemonade out of lemons. And yeah, so it was great to hear from you, Cookie. Thank you.
Cookie,
go ahead, Achilles. Go ahead, Achilles.
I'm sorry. The Cookie, that what makes that an even better decision is that's a campaign game. Mm-hmm. And so there's the possibility that his prisoners, that by surrendering and becoming prisoners, they could be exchanged in the future during that campaign, because the North and the South often exchanged prisoners. So those guys could end up back in Union forces. By getting them all killed, they're never coming back.
Right.
So that makes that decision an even more effective one.
Yeah, you got to think about that calculus, and again, situational, as we've established. Okay, the last person we're going to have on here is Peter. Peter, I have to ask you a very important question. How's Lizzie?
She's doing really well. Same stuff. She's really kind of just relaxing into the process of staying on the floor when it's a hot sunny day. And then when it gets a bit cooler, then that's when you burn off your energies. So
there you go. Good. You're giving her lots of pets and lots of treats, right?
No. Apparently that's the wrong thing to do.
Oh no, poor dogs.
I
let my dogs borrow the car, bro.
I go through the Spartan diet.
All right, what do you got for us, Peter? What do you got?
That's all right. I was interested to know what lemon analogy you was going to use for my commanding skills at Waterloo, but maybe there's only really one lemon analogy that you can use.
You made orange juice out of lemons.
Well, okay, so let's talk briefly about Waterloo. I might actually open the module really quick here.
I was going to say, as regards to...
Well, hang on. People need the background here so they understand. You were Wellington at Waterloo, and your forces... your forces were handled pretty roughly by Achilles, by the way, who was our Napoleon. And
yes, I hold the distinction, folks, of being the guy who lost the largest civilian Kriegsspiel game ever played.
Yeah. All right.
I'm a footnote in history.
But you actually had a good counterattack going here in the south that was working out, but here in the center, your center was starting to break, and then of course the Prussians arrive and bail you out. What do you want to say in terms of making lemonade out of lemons in that situation? Now that people know what was happening. Should actually use the proper colors for everyone, but
I will
I'll do
use
that while you speak. Go ahead.
I'll use a historical location to describe the overall tactics me and Eli formulated, and that location, in my opinion, is Cannae, the Battle of Cannae. So, and we could, so we did, basically.
All right.
We yeah. So
Go ahead.
to explain that, then, we knew that we were separated out a fair amount. I gave the reasons in your previous podcast because we were still not 100% sure where the French were actually going to land. But when we realised they were coming to the centre, the idea was that if Eli could hold at the historic location of Hockey-Mont and all this kind of thing, then he should, and we should support him there. But if he was unable to, which was indeed the case, then he should fall back, basically exposing the French flank to second division and a second corps, and then hopefully the Prussians would arrive and take the other flank. So,
And in a way, that's actually what happened, and that's what I've actually drawn on the map.
yeah. So it was. I had a vision of it being like Cannae. Obviously, tactical. That's the only element of it that was actually sound. I think Eli did his job, but I think perhaps we rode our luck on that. We were not quite like Hannibal, all completely organised, but then it was a kind of a scrambled situation over that the week before to come up with make sure we had the players and all that kind of thing. So and the maps and everything. So, but yeah, essentially it fell into being like the Battle of Cannae for us. As in the French were concentrated, so perhaps they couldn't get all of their forces into battle all of the time. Where I think we had all of our forces in combat at the end. So yeah, that was how it turned out.
All right. And I agree. Yeah, that's a great assessment of how the battle itself ended up. And yeah, you're right. That is an example of someone making lemonade with lemons. All right. Well, folks, we're out of time here. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up now. An announcement next Sunday. I'm leaving on a vacation, a short one. I will not be hosting Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel next Sunday, so there will be no show. I am announcing or commentating an event on Saturday, which I don't know. I think we're going to live stream that. I don't know. I'm not in charge of that, but I'm commentating. But aside from that, yeah, I'll be off and out of pocket, if you will, for a few days. And then, of course, I'll be back the following weekend. So we are taking a Sunday off. Pardon me. I'm sorry, but I didn't have a choice in the matter. So anyway, all right. Well, everybody, I want to thank you for coming on. I want to thank Achilles and Eli and Cookie and Peter and Wolfton. I appreciate you all coming on today's show and talking about how, as a player and as an umpire, you can kind of make lemonade out of lemons. The pro tips that I offered you. And there'll be more to come in the weeks ahead as we, develop our craft here. So thank you all for watching. And that is all for today. We'll see you in 2 weeks.